everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's very first sake podcast, and I am one of your intrepid hosts, John Puma from the Sake Notes, also the administrator over at the Internet Sake Discord. Do come down and join us for a drink sometime. And my pronouns are he/him.
And I am your host, Timothy Sullivan. I am a sake samurai, sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be here tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
Tim.
Yes.
Fun, ease, and things that are extreme. That's what we're about this week. I think it's been a little while since we've gone down the rabbit hole of extreme sake, right?
I think that of the sakes we have featured in our extreme series, they've been some really well-received episodes and very fun sakes to taste, don't you think?
They have certainly been extreme.
Yes. And
I mean, if we look back, we did extreme rice milling. We've done extreme sake meter value. What else? What's new? What's next?
This week, we're going to be looking at extreme yeast.
Quick question. How exactly does yeast become extreme?
We've done a few episodes that focus on yeast. We've done our flour yeast episode, and we did an episode on yeast in general.
So flour yeast, that's a little extreme.
That's a little extreme, but we're going to go even more extreme. We are not joking around here.
Oh, so more extreme than flour yeast.
How about wild yeast?
Wild yeast.
Yes.
So what, you just kind of like whatever's in the air kind of thing, or?
Yep. Spontaneous fermentation.
Oh my goodness. That flies in the face of everything I've ever heard about sake making, Tim.
It kind of does. You can consider this spontaneous fermentation or ambient yeast sake. When brewers began to be able to isolate yeast strains and pour in pure yeast into their batches, this basically enabled the modern fermentation starters, like the Sokujo method we talked about. You have to add a pure strain of yeast. So the hopes that just the right yeast is just floating around in the air and can fall in and propagate properly is not something that works with the modern ways of setting up a yeast starter. So going back to this ambient yeast style is definitely very extreme. And there's only a couple breweries that kind of deal with this way of making sake. And today we're going to be tasting one of them.
And I imagine that if you're going to be doing a style like this and you're going to be successful at it, your brewery has to be kind of an absolute legend in this circle, in this field. So cutting straight to the chase, what is our sake today?
We're going to be tasting a sake from a brand known as Tamagawa, which is kind of a legend in and of itself in the sake industry. You know Tamagawa well.
Very much so.
Yeah, a little bit about the brewery. So the brewery is called Kinoshita Shuzo, and it's owned by the Kinoshita family. It was founded in 1842. And it is in northern Kyoto. When you say Kyoto, a lot of people think of beautiful, shrine-laden Kyoto City. But this is far in the countryside of the Kyoto prefecture.
Oh, so it's not like it's not in downtown Kyoto, like around the corner from one of the shrines, and then there's a sake brewery.
No, and I know this because I went to this brewery once years ago, and it is a long trip from Kyoto City.
How do you get to northern Kyoto from? Well, I imagine you started in downtown Kyoto.
Yeah, you can get there on the train.
Oh,
but the last leg of the trip is one of those really small countryside trains, and it is not easy to get to. But it's a beautiful part of Japan, and when I think back to my trip, there's one thing that really sticks out, and that is the age of the brewery building. So this was a really old building. The walls were made out of sod. You could see some straw, some hay in there, and some sod that was like a clay type of texture to it, and very rustic. Mm-hmm. But this environment allows the yeast to cling to the walls and create an environment where they're going to be readily available when the yeast starter goes in there. So they're creating a successful environment for the type of fermentation they want to do, which is very counterintuitive to the modern way.
And, it's so interesting. Like, I guess you couldn't just like start up a new brewery and be like, I want to do this pre-modern style, because you don't have that buildup. You don't have the yeast. There's history involved with making sake like this. I mean, you'd have to like go to somebody's ambient yeast starter room and steal a piece of the wall and bring it back and try to cultivate it.
That's such an amazing point. When you do the ambient wild yeast, you're getting the sense of place. You're getting the history. That's
terroir. That's of a room, a specific room.
This is called low intervention sake, meaning that we're going to let the microorganisms as much as possible do their own thing on their own timetable. And this is very much different from the ways that have evolved for more structured and more modern styles of brewing. So it is really, really fascinating. And it is like, I would imagine like riding a bucking bronco. Like you don't have as much control over the outcome of the fermentation, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a little bit like natural wines almost. Just kind of letting it, letting essentially like letting Jesus take the wheel and and just letting it go. That's, I guess if you have the right setup and you know where to make the adjustments to keep it on course. I think what I'm saying is I feel like even though it's low intervention, you need a very skilled hand.
Oh my God, you sure do. And this is the perfect time to mention the Toji, Phillip Harper. Speaking of skilled hands.
I'd knock him up, you slap him down, Tim.
Yeah. So have you ever met Phillip Harper?
I have never had the pleasure of meeting Phillip Harper. I have read several of his books, though.
Oh, good.
Before I knew he was a sake maker, I knew he was a sake author. And somebody who knew I was getting into sake bought me one of his books as a gift. He's like, oh, you can learn about sake with this. And I did, and it was very nice. I kept note of, Phillip Harper, that's interesting. And then I kept hearing his name over and over again. And I hear that he was the first foreigner to ever become a Toji at a Japanese brewery, the Toji, the head brewer. And that by itself is, that's a very impressive piece of resume right there. Yes, that's extreme. That is, yeah. And to do that, and then he also, eschews modern styles in favor of this very like ultra old school way of making sake is even more interesting.
Absolutely. He is an amazing person, and he's an amazing Toji. And he's, over the years, I think he's worked at 3 different breweries, and he's currently at the Kinoshita Shuzo making Tamagawa. Mm-hmm. And their brand, they explain it on their website in a few different ways, and I think it's really illustrative of his view on sake making. They say a few things about their brand. One is that they view their brand as kind of a chameleon. Something that...
A chameleon?
Yes. So it can change color and it can change flavor with the temperature. So as you warm up or chill the sake, you have tremendous variation. Mm-hmm. And as you age the sake over time, you can get darker and darker colors. So I thought that was an interesting way of introducing their brand, that their sake can be a chameleon. But they also on their website describe their sake as indestructible.
And that is a term that we've used on the show to describe sake of Tamagawa's style.
Yes.
Before. And not always Tamagawa itself, but definitely breweries that produce sake that is a similar vein to what Mr. Harper is doing. And yeah.
Yes. And I know that they are huge proponents of aging, and they highly recommend buying their sake and making a note of the year and letting it sit and aging at home. And being indestructible sake is really part of that. We wouldn't recommend that with most sakes, but their style, their brand really lends itself to this at-home aging and real discovery of the changes that can happen over time. So it's a fascinating approach to sake making.
Yeah, you mentioned the aging being a thing that they're a big fan of. During the height of lockdown, when online sake brewery tours were becoming very popular, I got to attend a tour of Kinoshita that was hosted by Mr. Harper. And thing that really blew me away during the whole experience was they do have refrigerators on site for aging the sake, but he uses that to keep the sake from getting too cool during the winter. So it's really like the opposite of everything that you know about, or you think you know about aging sake, keeping sake, treating sake, everything. You just throw that book out the window and boom, Tamagawa.
Absolutely. So they're fans of funky flavors. They're fans of unusual production methods. They're fans of low intervention sake. I just think it's such an interesting brewery.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so allowing the wild yeast that's in the air to gently fall into your tank and reproduce, you have to have a good faith that you have the flora and fauna you want in your space.
It's fascinating. It's really an interesting and unique way to make sake. All right. Well, we've talked enough, I think, about this ambient wild yeast, the extreme yeast, Tim. I think it's time to sip on some of this extreme sake made with this extreme yeast.
All right. Well, let's take a look at which Tamagawa we've picked up. And if it's all right with you, let's get the stats for this. This is the Tamagawa Heirloom Yamahai Junmai Genshu.
Tim, as you mentioned earlier, this is from Kinoshita Shuzo. This is they were established in 1842. The rice here is Kita Nishiki. The alcohol percentage, Tim, is this legal? 21%.
Yes.
Actually, this is the maximum, right? This is the highest it can possibly be.
The bottle says 19 to 20%. The website says 21%. So I think that it's variable, which is in line with having a spontaneous fermentation. There's probably going to be a little bit more variation in there. But 21.9% is the legal upper limit. It has to be by law below 22%.
All right.
So we're already extreme, John. We haven't even gotten to the yeast yet.
We are very extreme already, yes. So that Kita Nishiki is polished down to 66% of its original size. The sake meter value, the old meter of dry to sweet, is plus 3.5. And the acidity, with ambient yeast comes wild acidity, 2.9.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen some high acidities before. So 2.9 is definitely on the high side. And I think our ambient yeast is, as you mentioned, going to contribute to that for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. As they are, as you mentioned, a low intervention. This is unpasteurized, undiluted, obviously at 21% alcohol. And it is unfiltered. Now, when we say unfiltered, we don't mean it's not that kind of unfiltered. It's not charcoal filtered.
Right.
It is a Morocco, right? Yeah.
Right. So they call this the 3U, unfiltered, undiluted, unpasteurized. Yeah.
The 3U. Ooh, I like that. And this is the red label, right, Tim?
Yes, this is called the red label. And this is, again, their Heirloom Yamahai Junmai Genshu.
Oof. All right. Wow. This is really interesting. Okay. You got your bottle handy?
I do.
All right. Let's open this extreme sake up and have a taste.
Yep. And I'll make one other note here.
Ooh,
I mentioned that they encourage people to age their sake at home. And this actually has a label that says brewing year of 2020.
Oh, nice.
So this was brewed in 2020 and it was released in 2021. Okay, John, we've got this in the glass.
We do.
So I noticed right away there's a honeyed color to this. It
yes.
almost looks like a little bit of a hazy white wine. It has a golden honey color to it, and it's clear, but do you see a little haze in there as well, like a Maroka haze? Yeah.
This is honestly a little bit more clear than I was expecting. I thought there'd be a little bit more yellowing to it. But, there definitely is a touch of it, and there definitely is a little bit of haze, but a little bit less than I was expecting.
All right, so we've got the color dialed in. Let's take a moment and give the aroma a little closer examination.
So it's funny, when I think of Tamagawa, I think of this aroma. To me, they have almost like a signature aroma, which is an unusual thing for sake. I don't think I can identify too many sakes from the nose, but I feel like this one, I almost could. And it's nice. It's a really pleasant, it's not, obviously not a John Puma wheelhouse sake, but there is something really nice about the nose on this. There's complexity. There's, a lot of depth.
I'm glad we've rolled you out of your wheelhouse, but how would you characterize this aroma that you tie so closely to the Tamagawa style?
One of the notes I have in here in my head, I always envision very high cocoa dark chocolate. Like the really kind of almost like, there's a point when the chocolate is that dark when it crosses over and gets almost like a fruitiness to it.
Yes.
And that exactly that is the thing that that I think about when I sniff this.
That is a great point. I've been trying to eat more really dark chocolate because it's a little healthier than milk chocolate. And when you get really high quality dark chocolate, you're right. There can be like this fruitiness in there. Really interesting. And that's a really exciting note. I really agree with that.
Do you have anything else on there? That dominates for me.
I pick up on something with a little bit of nuttiness to it, almost like an almond or a nutty kind of aroma to it.
I think I understand what you mean with that.
It is complex and it's rich. And if someone said, "Oh, this is a Yamahai Junmai made with wild yeast," my expectation would be this is going to be Funksville, like dirty socks and stuff like that. Not at all.
Funksville.
Like super funky, being weird for weird's sake. Do you know do you know the kind of sake I'm talking about?
I do.
I think that making this wild ambient yeast style is very risky to do, and to get it to come out with this engaging, deep, complex, but delightful aroma is where the genius comes in. Like, this is so hard to steer the ship in this direction when you're dealing with spontaneous fermentation. And the fact that they've do it year after year is like just amazing to me.
Yeah. There is a remarkable amount of consistency to their sake, considering how many variables there are in making it. And that's, so many variables that are purposefully out of their control, I want to say. And they do such a really good job with it. It's so nice. So shall we give it a taste?
Yeah, let's give it a taste.
Yeah. This is Tamagawa.
Yeah. So the first thing that really hits me is the acidity. It's bright, bracing, and almost like kind of shocks your palate. That acidity is right there to kind of wake you up.
It's
Hello,
big.
Pay attention. And then I get also that dark chocolate, fruity dark chocolate on the palate and more towards the finish. This has a long, lingering flavor. And there's umami for sure. A little bit of toastiness, but done with a very gentle hand. Again, I think you could steamroll a sake like this and make it all about just being funky and dunking your head in, umami. But they're taking a really gentle hand with this powerful process. And again, that's where the nuance and the craft really shows through.
Yeah.
The skill of the craftsman comes through in this type of execution.
Yeah, I think it would be really easy for a sake maker who is going for this style to just be like, let's just go and really, really steamroll the palate with everything that's going on here. Keep in mind, this is a 21% alcohol sake.
Oh yeah, can't forget that.
And it doesn't necessarily taste like that. There is, there's enough complexity in the flavor here that it's easy to forget that, I think. Because I think that a lot of other alcohols, when they get up to that percentage, you start to feel that burn a little bit more. You start to get the ethanol notes. And everything we talked about, we never said that it tasted boozy.
Right.
I think there is a little bit of it on the finish. Mm-hmm. But it's like it's married with the chocolate at that point, and you're having the chocolate and your brain isn't thinking about the booze.
Yeah. I'll disagree with you a tiny bit. I do feel the weight of the alcohol. I feel like it's extremely elegant and well done, but I feel the structure and body is there, and especially on the finish, I do feel the presence of the alcohol. But when you're dealing with something that is on the upper extreme of what's legally allowed,
yeah,
I think that it's very well integrated, but it is there, and it is bold for sure.
And that is the thing we talk about on this show so often, and is like the secret to great sake is balance. And this is a high wire act. There's so much going on here, and it all comes together really nicely.
The thing that I love about this sake is that now that I have it open, I can continue to age it at home.
With the brewer's consent. Even better.
With the brewer's blessing and consent.
Yeah.
We can continue to age this, watch it grow, have it be the chameleon,
Yeah.
And I can't wait to try this again and experiment with temperature. I'm having it at just below room temperature. I've had the bottle out for half an hour or so, and it's just below room temperature, and it's really expressive and nice, and it'll be fun to serve this warm as well and see what happens. So another time I'm going to try this and warm it up. I'm sure it will bring out even more of that umami flavor.
I've actually had this one warmed up a little bit, and it is one of few sakes that I actually prefer warmed up. I do really enjoy it cold as well. There's something really special that happens when you warm this one up. The chameleon, as you pointed out earlier.
Yes, the indestructible chameleon.
Yes, the indestructible chameleon.
So, John, what do you think that the ambient yeast portion brings to the table for this overall profile?
Well, I think that in order to accommodate the ambient yeast, you mentioned earlier that acidity is going to be a factor, and that was the very first thing we sipped on it. That was the first thing you said was the acidity is so big and so bright. And so that's going to be there by need and by design, I imagine, as well. But this has just got so much depth and so much complexity to it. And that's not something you typically get from your garden variety modern styles of sake. They're going for a specific flavor profile or something like that. And, meanwhile, this is just a journey. And it's an ever-changing journey as it warms up a little bit, comes to room temperature, and then beyond. It's just a fascinating sake.
Yeah, I think the use of wild ambient yeast is such a conscious decision for this brand. Like, that's not something you can do just by accident or just let's try it. It's like part of their DNA at this brewery, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't make all of their sake using the ambient yeast, but they have a line of the spontaneous fermentation that they do. Mm-hmm. And their use of the word heirloom, I think, is really interesting because I think it speaks to being handed down from generation to generation, the microorganisms they have in their brewery that they have over time slowly corralled into this flavor is just fascinating. You know, when we talk about yeast, one thing that yeast can really bring to the party when you're making sake, of course they make the alcohol, but they also contribute quite a lot to the aroma. So those aromatics that we're getting are part of that expression of Tamagawa's local microbiome, the microorganisms they have in their shubo room, in the room where they do the fermentation starter, where they get this started. And it is hyper localized to them. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that's really fascinating. That, it is. You know, we can't travel to Japan. We can't travel on the local train to northern Kyoto, but we can travel by tasting this sake. And the other thing I really love is that we get permission from the brewer to age it, experiment with it, and change it. They literally want their sake to be a chameleon. So enjoying it in all different types of ways.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to think of and I mentioned this earlier, how important the literal building is to the sake. If anything ever happened to that building, Tamagawa would literally never taste the same again. It would be impossible because, you know, it's without that building, they don't have it. Without that shubo room, the magic microbes in that room, you wouldn't get this specific combination of flavors. It's phenomenal. It's amazing.
Yeah. I think that the flavors will always be evolving and changing.
That's also true.
If you rely on what they do with modern yeast is they isolate a strain, they identify the DNA, and they keep it pure. Mm-hmm. Like a number 7 is going to be a number 7. But with this, it is an evolving thing. And one of the interesting things about this low intervention approach is that you can't pin it down. You can't micromanage it. You can't control the flavor that exactly. And it will evolve over time.
That's a really good point. That even even if they wanted to make the same thing over and over again, they couldn't.
Now, Tamagawa has a lot of fans, don't they?
Oh, yeah. I don't want to restate this too many times, but, you know, very much this is not my comfort zone sake, but this is a sake outside of my comfort zone that I absolutely enjoy drinking. And it's, you know, I respect it and I love it. It transcends style to me. You know what I mean? It's just so delicious.
Yeah, I agree. This is not a sake I would reach for if I was just going to be zoning out in front of HBO Max and, you know, need something to sip on, like our classic after work couch relaxation sake. But this is a sake to study and sip and enjoy and pay attention to when you're drinking it. It's like deserves that. Now, what would you want to eat with this?
I think you can eat anything with this. Whatever I like. You know, it's the chameleon. No, it's going to go with whatever you're going to have with it. I would imagine this can stand up to anything, any kind of cuisine. What about you? Have you had any adventures with pairing this?
Well, I know this is really outside your wheelhouse as well, but I've had good experiences pairing this sake with cheese.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Fortunate for me, unfortunate for you.
What kind of cheese? Because cheese is a lot of things.
Yeah, there's many varieties of cheese. You could pretty much go any direction, but given the body and the structure and the weight you have with this sake, I think you could go for, I really like a creamy blue cheese with this. I love blue cheese, and I think the saltiness and the creaminess of blue cheese goes really well with this. The other thing is that it's not too dry. It has a higher alcohol percentage, but it's not a bone-dry sake. So you get that hint of fruitiness, that hint of dark chocolate, that hint of nuttiness. And again, it's not being funky just to be funky. It's not trying to hit you over the head with screaming umami, although that, of course, that's in there.
Yeah.
But the other food I really thought about with this would be like those autumnal warm stews. Like shiitake mushroom broth stew, something in the fall and the autumn. That would be really good.
Nice.
Okay, John. Well, this was a fascinating sake, fascinating brewery, fascinating toji, and I think we hit our bar for extreme.
I think so. I think that when you when your yeast depends on the literal fauna in your walls, that's extreme.
Yes.
Much more extreme than flowers.
That is extreme. Badass extreme.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that our listeners will seek out this sake and have a chance to enjoy a little bit of extreme sake for themselves. And we have a few more surprises in our extreme series coming up in future episodes.
Yes.
So keep your ear to the ground and look out for those future extremes coming soon. John, so great to taste with you as always. Thanks for sharing this. I forgot to ask you, would this be considered crazy style?
In my home, this is very much considered crazy style. In fact,
Okay, good.
Just a quick aside, we've talked about how when we go to Japan sometimes, it makes sense to have like an anchor sake to a popular brand that you like, that you can find in a lot of places, and kind of point that out as being a sake that you would like to be the baseline for your adventure that evening. Tamagawa is my shell's baseline sake.
Yep.
So when she goes to a place, she'll, and they're like, oh, what kind of sake do you like? She will say Tamagawa. And they're like, oh.
Okay.
And that's where things begin for her, is that this is, setting the stage for how the rest of her night's going to go. And then they look at me and I say something very fruity and they kind of go like, really?
Are you two married?
Yeah, exactly.
So when we look up crazy style in my shell's little dictionary, there's a picture of Tamagawa in there.
I'm absolutely certain that's what
Okay.
is there.
All right. Awesome. Well, John, so great to taste with you. Thanks again. And I want to thank our listeners as well for tuning in. We really do hope you're enjoying our extreme show. Now, if you would like to show your support for Sake Revolution, the best way to support us now is to join our community on Patreon. We're a listener-supported show, and all the support we receive from our patrons helps us to host, edit, and produce a podcast for you each and every week.
And if you would like to learn more about our Patreon and become a patron yourself, you can visit patreon.com/Sake Revolution to find out more. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice.
And as always, if you would like to learn more about any of the topics or the individual sakes that we talked about in this or any of our episodes, be sure to visit our website, sakerevolution.com, for the show notes and for a written transcript of each and every episode.
And if you would like to reach out to us directly, or if you have a sake question that you need answered, burning sake questions that you need answered, we would love to hear from you. We have an email address set up for just that occasion. It's feedback@sakerevolution.com. You can also, if email is not your thing, you can DM us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On Instagram, we are Sake Revolution Pod, and everywhere else we are Sake Revolution. Google it, you'll find us. So, until next time, please grab a glass. Remember to keep drinking sake, and kampai.